All right, next up we have James Alford. James works as an academic advisor at Columbia College Chicago, which we had a previous guest on the podcast from Columbia College Chicago, and that was Jessica J.J. Jensen. James is also a speaker, a presenter, a mentor, and the host of the 79th Street podcast, which James looks to give advice and share his experiences from being a student and professional in higher education. James attended Northern Illinois University, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and a minor in Black Studies and a Master of Science in Adult and Higher Education. James was able to study abroad in Beijing, China, where he studied leadership, service, and culture. And this experience has shaped his perspective on many things and opened up so many opportunities to him as a student and currently as a professional. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're delighted to get the opportunity to chat to you, James, and lots of interesting things to talk about, I'm sure. Well, we like to get an opportunity to know you and give our listeners an opportunity to get to know you initially. So I suppose in terms of your work in higher ed, was like interested in your path into higher ed and getting to where you are now. Can you talk to us a little bit? Was it something that you always wanted to do, or how did you end up getting to where you are now, James?
So that's funny. So in college, I was like super involved, and I was really involved with our Residence Hall Association in college. And so as a freshman, I'm going to conferences representing our residence hall. And I remember they used to have like these student affairs sessions. And I actually had a very great relationship with my hall director at the time, Martise. And Martise was a higher ed professional by trade, and indirectly was kind of grooming me a bit, because he's like, hey, I think you'll be a great, fit. Actually seeing Martise like 2 years ago when I was in my previous role. He was working for OrgSync at the time, and he was just so delighted. It's like, I saw this for you. I'm so excited for you. But I think, just having like some of those experiences, right, where I'm doing that, and that's kind of like my intro. And then I started working at the Center for Black Studies, working in admissions, the TRIO office, and I worked in student involvement, leadership development as the vice president of finance for the programming board. And I was kind of like, I was doing it because people were like, well, you're involved in those things. It's time for you to take leadership positions. But then it was like that shift where I started talking to my TRIO advisor, and she was like, hey, I think you could go to grad school. And then she just kind of broke it down on where, like, I think this would be perfect. And I remember when I made the decision to apply for the higher ed program, and I was looking to the different things, I just got a lot of support from the staff who had knew me and seen me. They said, bro, we knew that from the beginning. Like, we knew you were going to end up in higher ed. I was like, I didn't know it. But everything I was doing was just, a small facet of it where, like, now you come in with a bunch of experience and, a bunch of things where, like, as a professional, you've had some of those, like I said, tough conversations, or even like just experience, right? Where I studied abroad. That makes useful because a lot of a good percentage of our international students are from China. And so when that comes up in a conversation, I say, oh, I studied abroad in China. Whether, they live in Beijing or not, they face just light up like, oh, and, and they could kind of tone into it. So I just think, like I said, it was just a journey where I was just doing stuff I was passionate about. And then somebody helped me make the connection. And I was like, oh, that's what it was. And I don't think it was like I said, a wrong choice, like I said, because I got a lot of great support. And, some of those same people to this day, they tell me like, hey, we think you're doing your best, you're needed in the field, because I think when you have people, who have a true passion for it, and not some people who, they luck up and they get a job, they're in the right place at the right time. I think, people like, hey, you deserve to be here. And so I'm just excited to, have the experiences, but also be able to, work in the field, because I do think and know that We impact students in a very dynamic way, but also we help change their narrative of, what advising is, because, some students aren't pro advising, or they don't think we're the place for them. And, I think in our roles, we have to show them like, hey, this is why, you need us. And we're just like you in so many ways, and you don't even know it.
Yeah. And sometimes and students could possibly have an idea of what they think an academic advisor is, and have this kind of create a story. And then we kind of have to break it down and be like, nope, that's not what we do. This is what we do. And this is how much we can actually help you. And it seems through the time, like you've had a lot of mentors that have, seen things in you. And I guess with that, when you were a student, when we had talked offline, you had mentioned that, it took a while before you saw your academic advisor. And,
oh yeah,
can you talk about maybe when you were seeing it, why you didn't see your academic advisor, and then what kind of got you to finally start seeing and meeting with your advisor?
Okay. So that's a fair question. And I tell this to my students too, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think the issue you run into in advising is you have students who are on it and you see them every semester, but then you have some students who you may see every 3 semesters, once a year, and so, but the reason I stopped going to advising was because, one, technically there weren't any safeguards like some schools do where it says you have to meet with an advisor. So we didn't have any of those. But my first semester, I ended up withdrawing from a class off top. And that kind of I felt some type of way, as a student, because, here I had this advisor say, oh, you can take those classes, but not really me not understanding, but them not explaining but that class isn't going to count towards your major. It's going to count as an elective. Now, me being an advisor now, I understand this, and we're that was the wrong advisor to take advice from, because they knew my LAS core, like my gen eds. They didn't know my major, where I should have talked to somebody from the major. And so that kind of, put a certain taste, in my mouth. And I was like, all right. But also, too, I was indirectly getting a lot of guidance, elsewhere, where I had people who was in my major, who had did my major, and was like, oh, you can take these classes, take these teachers. And so I was indirectly getting advised by some of the upperclassmen. And once I learned how to read the gen eds, it was kind of over with. I learned how to read the gen eds as a freshman. And so I really didn't need it. But what made me meet with an advisor was, one, I got put on academic probation, and they kind of, hey, well, I can't say probation. It was probation, but I had got dismissed from college. And so they liked the schedule I had set up for semester 3, and was like, hey, we like the schedule. We think you can be successful. You need to come meet with us. So they kind of forced my hand, and it's like, all right, I got to meet with you. If not, they're going to kick me out of school. And but I think secondary, time passed in between that visit and when I initially went, maybe 3 semesters later, where I knew graduation was coming up, and I knew hey, I need to figure some stuff out, because I think I have that idea, but I need confirmation from them. And my thoughts were right, and it worked out meeting with the different advisors, because I went to my LAS advisor. It was like, okay, cool, you're good. And then I went to my major advisor, and they was like, well, we're going to update your major to this catalog year. So that way we have to sub in 6 classes I had taken in a major, because they weren't in the major I came in on. And so, that saved me time at the end trying to rush and figure it out. But it was just because I knew, like I said, I knew graduation was coming, and I didn't want any surprises. So I was like, all right, I got to go meet with, the advisors. And even now, I tell students, I'm pro-advising, right? Where if you can meet with an advisor, meet with an advisor, because the more you meet with an advisor, not saying we're rushing through the students, profiles, but you just know it, you're more familiar with it, versus when you haven't met with a student in 2 or 3 years, you got to look at that as a blank slate, because you don't have any interest, your notes aren't up to date. And so, something hey, meet with your advisor, because it's going to help them, and it's going to save you from a 30, 45-minute appointment, whereas if you're doing it regularly, it could be, 10, 15 minutes, depending on what you got to discuss.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of that scene in Jerry Maguire, the "Help me, help you." That's coming to mind there. So I was interested in hearing about another of your kind of undergrad experiences because, as Matt mentioned in your bio, you studied abroad, and I was mentioning to you just before we started recording. I used to run a study abroad program. I'm passionate about study abroad and that getting that international experience. So I'm interested in hearing about your time going to China. Did you know much before you went, or what was the decision? What was the reason you decided to go and study abroad, James?
So my reason for studying abroad, it wasn't my own. So I went on as they say, a faculty led trip. So we had 3 staff that chaperoned our trip. There were 6 students, and so Miss Curry, she worked in the Center for Black Studies. I was a student working in the Center for Black Studies. We were very close. We're still very close to this day. And she was kind of like, "Hey, I'm chaperoning this trip. You're going." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not going." And so pretty much, it went from like this idea of her saying it to me taking the steps to study abroad, right? Where I'm applying to get into the program. Miss Curry helping me, raise funds to, get my passport, airfare, and things of that sort. And yeah, and it went from, like I said, a thought or words to, hey, you're studying abroad. And, after having that experience, like, I'm not going to say I knew much. Like, we had like 1 or 2 info sessions, like before, where they was trying to, talk about, kind of like the demographics, like where we'll be staying, learn some basic language and things of that sort. But we didn't know a lot. Like, we were fortunate enough to have a guy that was with us most of the trip. Watermelon was a blessing in disguise, because um, one of the one of the chaperones, she had went to China like the year before and made a connection, and so she kind of was like, "Hey, we're coming. This is what we can do." And she was with us for most of the trip. Like, it might have been like 2 days where she wasn't with us, but she was with us for the long haul. Like I said, truly a blessing, just to have her. But we really were able to just immerse in that culture, because with the exception of one person, so it was like 9 of us. The guy who I roommate with on the trip, he was a Mandarin minor, so he probably he knew more than the rest of us. But the rest of us was kind of like, we went because of Miss Curry. I can tell you that much. Like, Miss Curry said she was going, and so she just had that pulling where students or even like their parents like, "Hey, we're comfortable with you. My kids going, with her because she's gonna, look out." And so because to give some like perspective, right, where of the students, 5 of the students were Black African American, and we all had some type of involvement with the Center for Black Studies. And then the guy who our roommate guy was just, I don't want to say he was like a add on, like, but he was a Mandarin minor, and he was able to get some credits for that from attending because he had an instructor. I think his Mandarin instructor was actually in China when we visited, and she was visiting her family, and they invited us over for dinner one night. So that was like an experience you can't get, right? Where you get to go into their home and have like say a cultured meal and just learn more about their culture in an intimate environment where you don't have to worry about I don't want to say paparazzi, but that's kind of what it is, being in China, being Black. People were just so excited to see us, and wherever we went, they wanted to take pictures. And so it was good to have like those, get back to the hotel, those intimate moments where one, you could debrief, but also just not feel like all the attention is on you.
Now, flash forward, like when you're meeting with students, have you had any students that were on the fence of doing study abroad, and then you got to tell them about your experience, and then they got super excited to hopefully one day do it or have done it?
Yeah, I think with studying abroad, So it's been tough the past 2 years, I would say. And that's just because of, like I said, we have had COVID going on. But when students do mention it, I do drop it, and they get excited about it. Like, hey, I want to do something like that, because when you explain it, right? Because some people think like, oh, I have to do a year-long trip or a semester-long trip, and then I say like, well, there's a bunch of different trips you can do. Like, you can do like these 3-4 week trips. They have like 10-day trips. It's just a matter of what you're comfortable with and what your school is offering. And when they hear that, they're like, oh my gosh, I think I could do one of those, those smaller trips, as opposed, because you think about like, oh, I got to be going from a semester. I don't know if I can do that. But then you explain to them. And so I think just having that insight, but also, just telling them and showing them like, hey, I did it, you can do it. And like, I'm a trio student. So I think that just speaks for itself, where my family couldn't contribute anything to me studying abroad. The only thing that, my mom could do was pick me up and drop me off at the airport. Like, that was like the extent. Everything else, like I said, was a combination of like I said, Miss Curry, what she had to offer. And like I said, she did a lot, like, making sure that I had a passport, and working with, different organizations and her connections to help me get airfare, to go. And I think outside of that, everything else just kind of fell in line. And our study abroad program was good about letting us know that they had like these travel grants we could get. And so I think we all were eligible for like $1,000. So that's just like another, like I said, another piece of it. And then like, just the work, afterwards, where, me keeping my grades up, but also like, Miss Curry, pretty much going to the school and saying, hey, I got this student, it's a pretty solid student, needs some more help. And, to the school kind of backtracking, giving me a scholarship to cover the remaining balance I had for the study abroad trip, because I was registered for classes for that fall, but I was going to run into issues for the spring, because I had a nice balance. But Miss Curry, like I said, she found a way to make that happen. And when students hear that story, like I say, I don't think I'm special, if that makes sense. But I think if you had, like I said, the right people, in your circle that believe in you, but they love hearing those stories, because, like I say, it sparks the interest. And, and even like now, like I say, it's another conversation starter, right? Because we all are interested about different things. And so, like, for some things, like my major is political science, so we know those political science kids, they could talk about anything, but when we talk about like the different involvements, like I said, the study abroad, their conversation starters, and they help students see it as a viable option. I think that's the important thing, where when they can see somebody that looks like them, or somebody that is in our role, they say, okay, I can do that. I think that's a realistic goal for me to accomplish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The ability to kind of talk about your own lived experience, and to share that with the students is so valuable. Now, in your current role in Columbia College Chicago, you started, I think, in October 2019. So you had just about got your feet under the desk when the pandemic hit. And I suppose when we talked to JJ, she actually started during the pandemic. But I'm interested because you would have just started, kind of just got used to maybe the way things were, and then had the rug pulled out from under your feet a little bit. What was that experience like, James?
It was tough, right? It was tough because I was just getting acclimated. I probably worked in the office 5 months, and then it's like, oh hey, here's COVID. And of that 5 months, the first month I was pretty much training. I kind of kicked the training wheels off early, only because, I was kind of a little, a little bored. And so I had a coworker who started the week before I did, and it was only because she wasn't working. And, I was working, and so I needed to give her 2 weeks. And so she started like the week before I did, and so I started the week after. And so we kind of came off our training wheels at the same time. And it's only because I was like, hey, I know from doing this, the best thing is just having that experience meeting with the students. And so I kind of rushed it. And my boss was okay with it. She said, I know you can meet with students. I'm okay with, you jumping into our registration rush and meeting with students. She's like, if it gets overwhelming, let us know. And I think from that point, it was like, all right, introduce yourself to your caseload and, get it started. But it was tough because I don't feel like I had enough time to make any meaningful connections outside of our office. And so being in this virtual space, it was kind of hard to, to direct students in some ways because, like, I knew the people in my office, and we have a big advising department. I knew our trio peeps because they're in our same, like, academic unit. And outside of that, it's like, I don't know anybody in housing. And so, it was tough for a bit. And I think also, too, right, where that imposter syndrome hit because, like, some stuff and now you're questioning yourself because, when you have those brain farts, as we say, you can't just go next door and say, oh, hey, Stephanie, or hey, JJ, do you remember this? Or hey, Jill, and so now you're like, do I know how to be an advisor? Like, so some of those things start happening, but it definitely was tough, like, to go from that. And then, like, I don't know if it was Lorraine or I think it was Lorraine, then JJ, they got hired. So I think Lorraine did like a week in the office and then COVID happened. And then JJ was like soon after that. And it was interesting. Like it was definitely interesting. And, kudos to them, like I said, because I don't know, I know that's the new normal, but I don't know how and if I would have been able to do that, like transition in a remote world. And I know, like, even being in this remote space, a lot of people have been reluctant to switch jobs, from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's one of those, where it's like, do I change jobs and who knows if I will be able to stay in that job or how's the budget going to look and all that. But yeah, I think the same thing I've seen too. A lot of people kind of like just holding and sticking it out and seeing what happens. Now, you're talking about the pandemic, talking about, not being able to see like your other coworkers or to just, if a student has a question, literally just be able to hold on, give me a second, go next door, ask the question, come back. Yes, you can do that, or no, you can't, or here's what we got to do. And now it's like maybe we're using Teams or, some other type of technology to, hopefully get some of those quick answers, or it might be we just have to say, I'll get back to you on that and then find the answer later. How are things looking right now in terms of any updates from your institution on what the fall is going to look like?
So they kind of, the best way to put it, they kind of was trying to solidify that before they put out the course schedule for fall. So we have way more classes on campus, hybrid, for the fall than we've had probably all of this past year. We just got an email this week, I want to say Wednesday. The plan is to get staff back on campus over the summer. They're going to start with 1 day, then 1 day a week, then 2 days a week, to where entities can get back to, I think, possibly being open, every day of the week or whatever they see fit. So it's going to be interesting, moving forward, because I think, it's looking very, very promising because, like, the city of Chicago is relaxing some of the things they had in place. And so the city of Chicago is anticipating being opening back up like around July 4th. And so I think with just like some of that information, things are trying to get back to as normal as we can. And so, like I said, I'm interested to see, how it affects because, I know there was a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, prior to like this fall semester. Like, for example, being an advisor, like not everybody has an office with 6 feet clearance. But then, I've heard of stuff where, there's been a lot of research and things done by like the CDC and stuff where they're saying like, well, you can get away with 3 feet because that's what they're using in the classrooms, like, in the elementary level and things of that sort. And so I think it would just be interesting to see like people comfortability, because I think that's the biggest thing, right? Where, if you tell somebody you traveled during COVID, you might get some crazy looks like, what, you traveled during COVID, so I think everybody's going to have different comfortabilities. And so I think it's going to create like a new culture of office norms, right? Because you have people like me where like, I'm a people person. I'm not going to lie. Like I thrive off of, being around people, but you have some people who may say like, they're not people. They're like, hey, I want everybody to stay back. And so I know it's going to create like a new culture of what's name, because like I said, regardless of, what's going on, we're going to go back and like say, and to me, it's not going to be too far-fetched, like I said, because I was going to the office from July till about November, once a week. So I'm not opposed to it. So it's just interesting to see how that looks as far as the full campus.
I think we've been chatting for about half an hour, and it's very obvious you're a people person, and I'm 5,000 miles away, and I can tell that James, in a virtual sense. But one of the things I suppose that about being a people person, and in terms of the pandemic, you were busy because you started a podcast, and I suppose Matt mentioned that in your bio, but can you talk to us a little bit more about your podcast and what you cover in it?
Yeah, so crazy, being in quarantine, because I think at first we all treated quarantine as quarantine, right? I didn't see my mom and my brothers and nephews for probably like 2 months, and then it just hit that point where it was like, and my mom was living 2 blocks away from where I was. And so it's like, hey, you could come over. I'm like, I need to get out of the house. So I'm going to walk around there, type deal. And so, but one of my friends, former colleague, at my first institution, at St. Xavier, was like, James, you got these great ideas and a unique perspective. You need to put it on paper. And I started writing these blogs, but I was only sharing the blogs like her. Like, so I would write the stuff and she was like, you need to make it to a podcast. And I was like, and so I had remembered something, from talking to some of my former students, because they had did a podcast and I was listening to them. And so I'm like, oh, I could use this app. And so I had played around and did like a test run. And she's like, no, that's it. And so I look up, I was buying a microphone. And then, it started coming together because I had pre-planned a bunch of episodes before I launched. Like, I think I pre-planned like 5 episodes and then launched. And so, what I did was, I named the 79th Street podcast. I'm from Chicago. I'm from the south side of Chicago. So that's like the street I grew up on. And so a lot of times when people hear the 79th Street, it kind of has a negative connotation, and so I kind of wanted to change that, and what I like to talk about is some educational topics, and so I try to give students what they need to be successful in college, and so we talked about everything, like I said, from studying abroad to like some financial literacy episodes. On adulting, like how it is to be in that transitional space. And I think you'll be surprised at like how many people can relate. And I'm surprised at how many people who may not be in the field and reach out was like a kid who I grew up with. And I probably haven't seen him since like 2006 or 7 or something. And he had started messaging me, was like, man, I'm back in this, because he was living in Hawaii for a bit. And he was like, man, I'm out in the suburbs. He said, but I've been listening to your podcast. I think it's dope, just learning about your journey and story. And so I'm like, whoa. And that was something I was expecting, because this is a person with a military background. And I don't know if he has plans to go back to school, but I think off the strength, because like I said, it was me, it was just like, hey, I want to listen. And so, and also like a lot of my students from St. Xavier, they really enjoyed it, the podcast, and I've been able to pull them on episodes because they're the students now. Like I was a student and I'm a lot closer to being a student than some other professionals, but they're students now, they're living this. And so I think it's good to highlight their experiences. And so I've been, like I said, brainstorming, like I said, because I'm kind of on hiatus, like, just a little break, I got through season 2. So people have definitely been asking about season 3. I just had a conversation with one of my mentees just yesterday, and she was like, "Hey, what's up with season 3?" And I was like, "It's gonna happen." I said, "Well, for season 3, I was like, I want you to be, my co-host for season 3." And she was like, "Okay." She's like, "Let me finish these interviews because she's graduated now." So I think it'd be great to have that perspective of, and like I said, she has a different perspective than me because she graduated in 3 years, has a twin sister, and she graduated during COVID. I think that, is a huge accomplishment where, I hope all of those students who did have to graduate during COVID, they get their roses, because so many people who have degrees now, they all say one thing: I don't know if I could have went through school under these conditions. I wasn't made for those conditions, and you have all of these students persistent, and I think it's great to highlight that and just give them the roses. And so, but that's what I'm looking to do. Maybe looking to branch out into like some other like topics because there's a lot of things that interest me. And where some people was like, well, hey, let's change the way we talk about education, right? Anything can be educational. It's just a matter of how can you connect it back to your audience base. And so I'm kind of going through that phase of, trying to see like, how can I incorporate some other topics that, I may see, sit here and say like, oh, I want to do something, about that, incorporate those into the podcast.
Yeah, and education's so broad, and it's crazy how you can connect anything to anything. You can make it work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing or listening in when season 3 comes out. And one of the things too, we've been talking about over this interview has been, you've mentioned a lot of different individuals from like when you were a college student to
Mm-hmm.
being an advisor to when you were doing study abroad. And it's all been these mentors, and so individuals that have kind of been in your life that whether or not you chose them, they were there. And they've been people that have seen things in you. And, whether it's not like they went and said, this is the person I'm going to help or I want to work with. They saw something and you had those connections with them. Now, as advisors, we meet with students all the time, and some we meet with more constantly than others. But sometimes advisors may not see themselves, or not even advisors, even just anyone that's an advised professional may not see themselves as advised or as mentors. But you've been a mentor to a lot of students. You've been mentored. Any advice that you have for advised professionals who never thought of themselves as mentors, or any advice you have for those individuals?
Yeah, so I think, as a professional, like some people want to do it, but some people don't want to do it. And that's completely okay because, like I tell people, like, it's work, and it might be work outside of work, where some people, they don't want to, they don't want to do it. But for those who want to do it, I would say be open. Look at those students that come to you a lot and they may consider you a mentor and you don't know it. Like, especially if they're sharing, a lot of those personal ideas and details with you. But I would say just be open to it. But I also think too, we're all going to draw in different students, right? Where there's going to be students who they come to us because they have to. It says you're my advisor, I'm going to come to you. But like, with me being a black male, I have students who want to interact with me because of that, right? Where they've been in a number of advising spaces and say, oh, hey, I've never had a black advisor, in a program I was with, like, and those are like different conversations, all together, especially, I don't want to say when a student lead with that, but like, their guard is already down a little bit, and so they tend to like stuff they may not show to another advisor. They'll share with me just because of them seeing that. And so I think for like the professionals, I think advising is fulfilling. You get to create like a bunch of, I don't want to say mini yous, but like I was always told, like when I was in undergrad, some of my peeps always said, they said, man, we don't make a lot of money. They said, but our pay is seeing you cross the stage. And that's kind of where I'm at. When you see your students graduate and cross the stage, I try to shout them out, like I said, my social media, things of that sort, because there's a bunch of different types of mentoring, and like I said, some mentoring is more hands-on, and so I try to take that hands-on approach where I have students who, like I said, were on my caseload at my first job, and I'm giving them advice as they transition from their first big person job to the second big person job. And so, and those are the type of relationships like I look to build, because like it's gonna be fulfilling in the end. And like, whenever you have a student, like before I left St. Xavier, I had two students who they were like my first caseload. And so it was Marvin and Angie. And so we were pretty tight. And so I was able to bond with both of them. One, because I was their specialist in trio, but Marvin, we bonded because he was having some issues at home, with his dad. And so I was able to help talk him through that. Angie, she just came to me a lot. Like she was a student working in our office. But fast forward, the next year, Marvin's younger sister comes. And so I get placed with her. But off top, she was like, well, my brother talks about you. So she didn't have any issues coming into the office. The next year, Angie has two twin sisters that started coming. And so off top, where like I said, it started with two, now you have five. And so, these are all students that, indirectly I'm still, connected with, because one, I was their specialist, but because their sibling had me, and talked about it, they were able to come and say, all right, I'll come to James. If I have issues, they were receptive of some of the conversation. I think and sometimes having a good, reputation among the students can help, as professionals, because how do you come off to students in your meetings? Like when I was at, before I went to NIU, one of my buddies who I went to my high school here went to NIU. He said, hey, when you go to NIU, he said, go to the Center for Black Studies and you need to holler at Mr. Smith, Don Bramlett, Miss Curry. These are all people who, I found within a week of being on campus. And the only one I knew prior was Mr. Smith. I met him for the first time as a sophomore in high school. But I went to his office the first day of class. And, I just told him who I was and where I was coming from. He was just like, all right. He's like, come around. And from that, you meet other people. Like I met Miss Curry, and she was like, just come up here. We gonna see, what's to it. Like, we gonna see what it is to be successful. And I think just from having those interactions, I know, like, as frustrating as it can be sometimes being in higher ed, working during the pandemic, some of the politics, the fulfillment, like I said, comes from the student, but also I think from having those experiences and having those people take the time to teach me, to nurture me. I feel like I have to do it to, I have to do it for students that I come into contact with that's willing to allow me in, because, I believe that it's truly a two-way street. It can't be a one-way street. It has to be a two-way street. And if the students want it, then I want it. If they don't want it, then, hey, somebody else will want it down the line.
Yeah, but it's not only in your work where you give back, because you volunteer as well, right?
Yeah. So, just fortunate, to just be, like I say, in spaces that have impacted me. Like, I just attended a virtual fundraiser for the nonprofit that I was in high school. And right before COVID ended, like I kind of talked about this yesterday, because we did some breakout rooms, I was like, hey, like I said, I'm not saying I have a lot of money, but I give when I can. I said, but I know if anything I can do, I can give my time, and so I try to, give my time when I can. And right before COVID happened, I think the weekend before they shut down Chicago, I was with this nonprofit volunteering, taking students out, campaigning for the presidential election. And so just to be in those spaces and, leveraging my experience as well, right, where sometimes I'm sought out because, I am a Black male from like that inner city. I survived, encounters like with gangs where I could have went the gang route, but I chose school, and also having a master's degree where some people was like, well, if we're talking about mentoring people for real, we can't talk about mentoring and not have you in a room, because I think also too, mentoring has unofficially become a part of my identity. And so I'm excited when I talk to people and people say, well, we was talking about mentoring, and I was like, how are we going to talk about mentoring and not have James in the room? Like, and so to me, that's a good feeling, because like I've been around it so long, and like now I just pride myself on it, right? Where in grad school, I thought it was cheating for me to write papers on mentoring. Like, and then I had a teacher said, no, James, it's not cheating. Write the paper on mentoring. And I was like, damn, okay, let's do it. And so it just made it, it made it that much more fulfilling, for me to be able to do it. And then now, like on top of having the experience, I can put the academia part to it, because I know some of the terminology. I know how these things go hand in hand. And so I think, if you ask like some of my mentors, they'll say like, hey, you have, I don't want to say graduated, because I feel like, but I've met all their benchmarks where it's like, hey, you're no longer like, when I went to grad school, they said, we can't look at you how we looked at you when you were an undergrad. Like you one of my colleagues now, like, and I can't do nothing but respect that. But they're excited because they help, play a part in that development and that growth.
Yeah, isn't it amazing though? Like people that you still connect with, that when you first started, and how that relationship has grown, to where it was a student advisee, and then becoming colleagues, and then friends, and then in a sense, in a way, now family. So that's always fascinating. And in your email signature, you have the quote every time. It says, everything you need to accomplish your goals is already in you. So talk to us about that quote, why you chose that.
Yeah. So that quote, I don't want to say it's like short and simple, but, I think sometimes we just get caught up with a lot of extreme pressures, or that we need other people. And I'm not saying we don't need people, but I think if you truly want to accomplish something, it comes from, inside. And so if you want to make something happen, like, and to give an example, right? As much as advice you can get from somebody, as much resources you can get somebody, it's still upon you to make it happen. So whatever it is from the inside, you got to take that first step. And so if that's going to the gym, I got to be open to doing that, and I can, comfortably say we're like, that was an area where, I was struggling with, right? Where, I hadn't been in the gym. And so, yes, my line brother's like, hey, bro, we need to get you in the gym, like, the healthy lifestyle. And I'm like, okay, and so I went, but he's in Kansas City, I'm in Chicago. So he can't go to the gym with me. I gotta push whatever limits inside of me to make it happen. And, I tell people like, I'm not saying I'm trying to, drop a significant amount of weight, but I want to get more active. And like now, like over the past, like month, right, where my body has done like a complete reprogram, right, where I think before I was like, I go to bed about midnight, after, and now I'm asleep by 10:30. I'm up at like 6:15, and then it's like, and I'm not one of those people. I don't go to the gym every day. I try to go like 3 times a week. That's enough for me. And but like, my body wakes up and I'm like, oh, it's 6:15. I'm gonna go to the gym. And so, but it just took for me to get to that point where I'm like, all right, I see this as a as something I need to do. And so, but I think that starts within yourself, because people can tell you to do something or suggest you do it, but you got to take the first step.
James, I think there are going to be plenty of listeners who will hear you speak about, mentorship, motivation, about your work, about the podcast, and who might really want to get in touch with you, hear a little bit more from you. How can our listeners go about doing that?
Yeah, so they can LinkedIn, James Alford, Alford. I work at Columbia College Columbia College Chicago as an academic advisor. On Instagram and Facebook, you can look up the 79th Street _podcast, and you'll see a nice blue and black logo that says 79th Street. Talks about financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and I think money as well, and some of the buildings. And I think those are like the best ways. Like, I'm on social media a lot, but definitely connect with me. Like I said, I'm always looking forward to connecting with people. Any podcasts, ideas. I'm always game, and I'm even, probably more excited, to maybe branch out to some students from some other schools to get some more perspective. And I know being in this role, we have the means to make it happen, because we're connecting in this virtual space, but we all may have students that we're close with and say, hey, you need to do this podcast, or I want to introduce you to somebody because I think you'll be a good fit. But I'm just always game to make it happen. But I think those are the best ways, like LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook, 79th Street Podcast, because I think we all have a role to play, and I think together we all can make it happen.
That's right. We are in this together. We'll make it happen together. We can learn from one another. We can share our stories, share our experiences. So definitely check out James' podcast, 79th Street Podcast. Catch those previous episodes and look forward to season 3. James, thank you so much for being on our podcast.
No problem. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. And I don't know how you all typically recruit people. I know I reached out, but one of my colleagues was like, hey, JJ was on this podcast. I think you'll be a great fit, and you should reach out to him. And so, I just reached out, just to see it, but I do appreciate you both for having me on as well.
Yeah, you reached out on Instagram just to say hi, and then, hey, join us on our podcast, and here we are. We really appreciate it, James. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.